Every single breath I took in that house had a price tag. 50 cents for a glass of juice. $1 for a hot shower on the afternoon of my 10th birthday. I emptied my pockets of the sticky, crumpled dollar bills and silver coins I'd earned. From hauling bags of crushed soda cans to the recycling center. Dad, I want to buy a slice of birthday cake. No frosting, just the plain sponge. Is $1 enough, my father? Richard looked down at me, his brow furrowing in disgust. It's $2. If you don't have the money, you go hungry. It builds character, it teaches you independence. I swallowed the hollow ache in my stomach with my only dollar. I bought 10 minutes of screen time on my mother's iPad to watch a cartoon, just to feel like a normal kid for a fraction of an hour, but right in the middle of the episode. A bank notification dropped down from the top of the screen. Transfer successful, $10,000 added to dependent card. Memo, a little pocket money for my precious boy. Stared at the screen until the letters blurred. I finally understood the strict ledgers. The price tags, the lessons in independence. They were reserved strictly for me, their biological daughter. Early the next morning, before the sun had even touched the manicured lawns of our gated community, I walked out the front door. I didn't get far before a rusted van idled by the curb. A man with a jagged scar across his cheek rolled down the window and asked if I wanted a piece of candy. I clutched the straps of my worn backpack, looking at him with wide, timid eyes. How much does the candy cost? He blinked, clearly taken aback. It's free, kid. I reached out, took the bright plastic wrapper, and, without a second of hesitation, climbed into the back of a van I knew was never coming back. Mister, does it cost money to ride in this car? I asked, my small fingers nervously twisting the candy wrapper. I had $1 from selling cans, but I spent it watching cartoons. The man with the scar threw his head back and laughed. It was a harsh, scraping sound. Free. It's all free, kid. Uncle Jack's is taking you to a great place. From now on, eating and sleeping won't cost you a dime. A heavy, breathless sigh of relief washed over me. So, Uncle Jack's, are you going to sell me to someone else to be their daughter? Jax chuckled, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. Something like that. We're finding you a new home. My eyes lit up in the dim, stale air of the van. In my new home, will I have to pay for drinking water? Jax slammed on the brakes, slightly turning to stare at me. You pay for water at your house? Yeah, I nodded earnestly. 20 cents for tap water. 30 cents if I want it warmed up. 50 cents for juice. Jesus Christ. Jax muttered, shaking his head. I've been in the trafficking business for 15 years and I ain't never seen a hustle that dark. Who raised you, Ebenezer Scrooge? I didn't know who Ebenezer Scrooge was. All I knew was that my mother, Valerie Croft, was the CEO of a publicly traded tech conglomerate. She was famous for her generosity. She wrote million-dollar checks at charity galas without blinking. I leaned my head against the cold, hard metal of the van's interior. I watched through the dirty window as we drove further and further away from the mansion. Meanwhile, back at the Croft estate, a gourmet breakfast spread was laid out on the massive marble dining table. Preston, my adopted brother, sat at the head of the table. Huh, where's Sally? Preston asked, his voice dripping with faux innocence. She's going to be late for school. Is she throwing a tantrum again? Richard frowned. Usually, by this hour, I would have polished everyone's shoes and mopped the hardwood floors, just to earn enough for a slice of toast. He dropped his silver serving spoon, his face darkening. Is she giving me an attitude just because I didn't let her buy that cake yesterday? Valerie let out a cold, dismissive laugh. Swiping to the next page of the Wall Street Journal app, she's spoiled. Let her skip 2 meals, she'll learn. Go fetch her, Richard. Otherwise, today's breakfast price is doubled a few moments latte, Maria. The housekeeper hurried into the dining room. She was clutching an iPad to her chest, her face pale. Mr. Croft, Mrs. Croft, you need to see this. Valerie took the tablet. On the screen, the security footage played in black and white. A tiny figure, carrying a frayed second-hand backpack, slipping quietly out of the wrought iron gates. Richard slammed his palm against the marble. Unbelievable. She thinks she can just run away. How much money does she even have on her? Where could she possibly go? Valerie's eyes went flat and cold. She locked the iPad screen. Don't bother looking for her. She has no money, no survival skills. Valerie sneered. She'll starve for a day out there, and then she'll come crawling back, crying at the gates. And when she does, the reentry fee to this house is going to be $10,000. But an entire day passed and I never came back. Miles away, a filthy blindfold was ripped from my eyes. The pungent smell of rust, stale beer, and damp earth hit my nose. I was in an abandoned warehouse. Several men in grease stained clothes were playing poker around a folding table. When they saw Jax walk in with me, they threw their cards down. Damn Jax. Premium merchandise. This time a man with rotting yellow teeth leered, reaching out to pinch my cheek. Instinctively I flinched and pulled away. Smack, the yellow-toothed man backhanded me across the face. Pain exploded across my cheek. Hot and sharp, who told you to dodge, you little brat? I fell hard onto the concrete floor. The metallic taste of blood seeped into the corner of my mouth. Ooh, look at the glare on this one, the man laughed, pulling back his heavy work boot to kick me in the ribs enough. Jax caught the man's shoulder, shoving him back. Cut it out, this one's completely healthy. We're gonna get top dollar for her. Jax crouched down until he was eye level with me. Listen to me, kid. You're here, which means you play by our rules. I pointed toward the darkest corner of the warehouse. You see that cage? It was a massive rusted iron dog crate. Inside, 3 mangy aggressive dogs paced back and forth growling. If you don't listen, you sleep in there with them. If you listen, you get fed. I slowly wiped the blood from my chin with the back of my hand. How much to sleep in the cage? I asked. Jax froze. The entire warehouse erupted into booming, ugly laughter. Holy shit. Jax, is this kid mentally challenged? The yellow-toothed man cackled. She wants to pay to sleep in a dog cage. Jax shook his head, staring at me like I was an alien. It free, kid, free. Lodging and the food? I asked, my voice steady. Also free, I nodded. I pushed myself off the ground, dusted off my knees, and walked straight toward the rusted iron bars. Then I'll sleep there as long as it didn't cost money. Anywhere was fine back at the mansion. Sleeping in that tiny, unheated bedroom cost me $200 a month in rent. This place was filthy. It smelled like wet fur and decay. But it was free. I crawled into the cage, pulling my knees to my chest, making myself small as the dogs sniffed at my shoes. The men's laughter echoed off the high corrugated ceiling. I knew they were laughing at my stupidity, but as I sat there in the dark, my heart felt lighter than it had in years. To me, anywhere in the world that didn't demand coins for my existence was paradise. That evening, the Kraft estate finally received a phone call from the police. Is this Valerie Kraft? This is the precinct. Valerie was in the middle of a Zoom call with her board of directors. She sighed deeply, annoyed, speaking. What is it we found? A backpack belonging to your daughter, Sally Croft, abandoned by a drainage canal on the outskirts of the city. We need you to come down and identify it. Valerie's tone was impeccably flat. I do not have the time right now. I am in the middle of a vital executive meeting. When it concludes, I will dispatch my assistant. The officer on the line was stunned into a brief silence. Ma'am, this is your biological daughter. She could be in grave danger. You need Officer Valerie cut him off sharply. She is throwing a temper tantrum. She ran away from home to get attention. Furthermore, my time is currently valued at hundreds of thousands of dollars an hour. I am not going to waste it driving across town for a dirty backpack. Besides, she added with a dry scoff, we live in a civilized society. What exactly do you think is going to happen to her? Inside the police precinct, Officer Ramirez slammed the receiver down so hard the plastic cracked. Is she even human? Ramirez seized, her hands trembling with rage. Her 10-year-old kid is missing, potentially dead, and she says looking for her is a waste of time. Detective Harrison leaned against the desk, taking a slow drag from his cigarette. Did you run a background check on this Valerie Croft? Yeah. Richest woman in the city, renowned philanthropist, donates millions to children's charities every year. Ramra has let out a bitter, venomous laugh. Philanthropist. More like a sociopath. She bleeds money for strangers to look good, but won't spare a second for her own flesh and blood. Where did you say you found the bag? By that foul drainage river on the west side. Inside there were just a few cracked textbooks, and this. Mirrors pulled out a clear evidence bag. Inside was a small spiral-bound notebook. The pages were warped and waterlogged, the ink bleeding at the edges. She opened to the first page, written in shaky, childish handwriting. January 1st, 2026, 2 strawberries. Oh, $1, 1 plain piece of toast. Oh, 50 cents, flushing the toilet twice. Oh, 40 cents. Watching TV for 10 minutes. Oh, $1. Ramirez read the entries aloud, her voice breaking. Her eyes swam with tears. What kind of hell? What kind of absolute hell was this little girl living in? Detective Harrison crushed his cigarette into the ashtray, his jaw locked tight. Open a criminal investigation. Right now, this isn't just a missing persons case anymore. This is severe, systematic child abuse. Send a squad to the Croft estate. If they refuse to cooperate, put them in cuffs at the Kraft mansion. Richard was standing in front of a gilded mirror, adjusting the lapels of a freshly delivered bespoke tuxedo. They had a high-profile charity gala to attend tonight, and he was taking Preston to introduce him to the city's elite. Doorbell rang. Maria opened the door, and a team of uniformed officers shoved past her. LED by Detective Harrison. Richard Croft. We suspect your daughter, Sally, has been the victim of human trafficking, and that she has been subjected to severe, prolonged abuse within this household. You're coming with us, Richard. Was Frog marched out the front door and shoved into the back of a squad car. Preston stood at the top of the grand staircase, bursting into perfectly timed tears as he dialed Valerie's private number. Valerie Croft was sitting in the precinct's interrogation room. She was staring at the waterlogged notebook. Inside the plastic evidence bag, a look of profound boredom on her elegant face. What exactly is this supposed to prove? It proves my daughter has a strong head for economics and meticulous bookkeeping skills. My daughter lives in a $20 million estate. She rides in armored SUVs. She attends an elite prep school. You call that abuse? Don't you officers have actual criminals to catch? Why are you harassing my family over parenting techniques? Detective Harrison slammed both hands on the metal table. Getting right in her face. Valerie, read the damn page. Oh. Mom, $1,000 for interrupting her phone call while mopping the floor. You look me in the eye and tell me that is not psychological torture. Valerie faltered for a fraction of a second. She remembered that day her stock portfolio had taken a sudden dip. She was furious and she had screamed at Sally just because the mop bucket made a splashing sound. A microscopic sliver of unease prickled the back of her neck, but she quickly buried it under a mountain of arrogance. It was a joke. The child is simply too literal, too sensitive. We are done here. I am posting bail for my husband. When you find the brat, call my assistant. She grabbed her designer coat and stood up to leave. But before she could reach the handle, the heavy door was violently thrown open. Officer Ramirez stood in the doorway, her face the color of chalk. Detective, we found her. Where at? At an underground clinic on the south side. Ramirez's voice was shaking violently. The syndicate. They were in the middle of a procedure. What procedure? Organ harvesting. For the first time in 10 years, the world around me had gone completely quiet. I remember the smell of alcohol and bleach. It was stronger than the damp earth of the warehouse, stronger even than the aggressive scent of the guard dogs I had shared a cage with the night before. I was lying on a narrow metal table under a light so bright it made my eyelids sting. There were 3 of them in the room. 2 wore blue paper scrubs that crinkled when they moved, and the third was Jax, standing by the door with his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He looked nervous, his eyes darting toward the small, dirty window that looked out onto an alleyway. She's small, one of the men in scrubs said. He had a pencil behind his ear and grease under his fingernails. He didn't look like the doctors I had seen on the television screen through the window of the electronics store. The lungs might not be fully developed. We need to be sure about the blood type before we call the courier. She's healthy, Jack said, his voice flat. Lived in some fancy gated community. Probably had organic vegetables her whole life. The parents are loaded, but they don't want her back. She's clean. I blinked up at the ceiling, my fingers lightly touching the edge of the cold metal table. Excuse me, I whispered. The man with the pencil froze. He looked down at me, his brow furrowing. What? How much do I get? I asked. My throat felt dry, like it was lined with sand. For my kidney, or my eyes. If you take them, do I get enough to pay my mother back? The room went very still. The second man, who was busy arranging some shiny metal tools on a tray, stopped what he was doing. He turned slowly to look at me, then at Jax. What is she talking about? The second man asked. I don't know, Jax muttered, looking down at his boots. She's been asking about prices since I picked her up. Thinks everything has a tag. My mother said my birth cost $84,000 in medical bills, I explained, trying to keep my voice steady so they wouldn't think I was complaining. And my room is $200 a month. If I give you my kidney, will you write a check to Valerie Croft? Just tell her it's from Sally. That way, she won't have to charge me for the tap water anymore. The man in the blue scrubs stared at me. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could say a word, the heavy metal door of the clinic didn't just open. It shattered inward. The sound was like thunder. A flash of white light blinded me, and then the room was filled with shouting, the heavy thud of boots, and the smell of gunpowder and dust. Police. Nobody move. Hands where I can see them. I scrambled backward on the metal table, curling my knees to my chest. I wanted to find my backpack, but it was gone. I had left it in the van. Kid. I've got the kid. A woman in a dark blue jacket with yellow letters on the back lunged toward the table. She didn't look like she wanted to hurt me, but her face was twisted in a way that made her look like she was about to cry. She had a badge clipped to her belt. Sally? Are you Sally? She asked, her voice cracking. Yes, I said, squeezing myself into a smaller ball. Is this a rescue? Do I have to pay for this? The woman stopped. Her hands hovered near my shoulders, shaking slightly. What did you say, sweetheart? The police? I said, my voice barely a whisper. The sirens. My dad said the city taxes pay for the police, but since I don't pay taxes, using police time is stealing. How much do I owe you for coming here? I only have $1, but I spent it on the cartoon. I can go back to the recycling center. I can get more cans. The woman, whose name tag read Officer Ramirez, closed her eyes for a long second. When she opened them, they were wet. She didn't answer my question. Instead, she reached out and gently pulled me into her arms, wrapping a thick, scratchy wool blanket around my shoulders. "It's free, Sally," she whispered, her chin resting against my dirty hair. "This one is completely free." They took me to a hospital. It was different from the clinic. The walls were painted a pale, soft green, and there were pictures of cartoon animals on the ceiling. A nurse brought me a plastic cup filled with apple juice and a small plastic container of chocolate pudding. I sat on the edge of the high bed, my legs dangling, staring at the pudding. "Go on, eat," Detective Harrison said. He was sitting in a chair by the door, his coat unbuttoned, a small notepad in his hand. He looked very tired. "You must be starving." "Is the juice 50 cents?" I asked. Harrison looked down at his notepad, then back up at me. His expression was very quiet, very still.
"No."
"The hospital provides it." "But who pays for it?" I insisted. "Nothing is free. My mom says people who think things are free are parasites. She says parasites go to jail." "Your mother was wrong," Harrison said. His voice was low, like a rumble of distant thunder. "In this building, you don't owe anyone anything. Not for the juice, not for the bed, not for the doctors. Do you understand me, Sally?" I didn't believe him, of course. Adults always had a ledger. If they didn't ask for the money now, it just meant they were adding it to the bill for later with interest. That was how my father explained the re-entry fee he had threatened me with when I was 8 and stayed at the library past 5 o'clock. So I decided not to touch the pudding. If I didn't eat it, they couldn't charge me for it. I pushed the plastic cup of juice to the very back of the bedside table, out of reach, so I wouldn't be tempted to drink it if my throat started to burn again. A few hours later, the door opened, and Officer Ramirez walked in. She wasn't wearing her heavy police jacket anymore, just a plain blue shirt. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "The lawyers are downstairs," she told Harrison, ignoring me for a moment. Valerie Croft brought a team of 5. They're trying to claim the ledger was a gamified chore chart to teach financial literacy. They've already filed for bail for Richard. Harrison let out a short, sharp breath that sounded like a curse. "A chore chart?" "She charged the kid 40 cents for flushing the toilet." "They have receipts, Harrison," Ramirez said, her voice dropping to a whisper, though I could hear every word. "They actually kept receipts of the money she earned from the recycling center and matched it against the food she ate. They're going to try to paint this as a highly structured, modern parenting style. They're calling it hyper-independent accelerationism." "I don't care what kind of fancy words they use," Harrison growled, standing up. "We have the warehouse. We have Jax's confession. He said she walked into the van willingly because she thought the candy was free. Do you know how that sounds in front of a jury? A 10-year-old girl climbs into a human trafficker's vehicle because she's never been offered anything free in her life." I watched them talk. I wondered who Valerie Croft was to them. To me, she was the lady who smelled like expensive lavender and who had a calendar on her desk where my name was written in red ink only when I owed her money. "Detective?" I called out. Harrison turned, his face instantly softening into that strange, pitying look that I was beginning to dislike. "Yes, Sally? Can I have my notebook back?" I asked. "The water took some of the ink, but I need to make sure my calculations are right. I think I still owe Preston $3 for the pencil I borrowed in the 2nd grade. He said the interest was 10% per week. I don't want him to take my shoes." Harrison stared at me for a long moment. Then he walked over, knelt by the side of my bed, and took my hand. His hand was large, warm, and rough. "Sally," he said, "you don't owe Preston anything. You don't owe your mother anything. And you don't owe your father a single penny. From now on, your only job is to be a kid." "But how do I pay for the air?" I asked, perfectly serious. "My dad said the air conditioning in the mansion cost 12 cents an hour per room. I kept my door closed to save money, but he said the draft from the hallway still counted." Harrison closed his eyes. I saw his jaw muscle twitch, once, twice. When he opened his eyes, there was a darkness in them that wasn't directed at me, but at something far away. "We're going to go to court, Sally," he said. "And we're going to show them your ledger." The trial did not happen right away. There were weeks of preparation, weeks of staying in a place they called a shelter, though it felt more like a very quiet boarding school. There were other children there, but I didn't talk to them much. They spent their time playing with plastic blocks and drawing pictures of houses with yellow suns in the corner. I spent my time counting. I counted the tiles on the floor, the number of fluorescent light bulbs in the hallway, the slices of bread they put on my plate. Every time a counselor named Miss Clara gave me a clean set of clothes, I wrote the date and the item down in a new notebook I had found in the common room. I didn't have a pen, so I used the edge of a plastic spoon to scratch the numbers into the paper, leaving colorless, indented marks that only I could read. 1 blue t-shirt, $5. 1 pair of socks, $1.50. Use of shower, 4 minutes 40 cents. I wanted to be ready. When the bill came, I didn't want to be surprised. On the day of the preliminary hearing, Miss Clara dressed me in a dark blue dress with white collar points. She tried to brush my hair, but it was still thin and dry from the years of toast and water, and the brush kept getting stuck. "You look beautiful, Sally," she said, giving me a small, encouraging smile. "Did this dress come from the state?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "Does the state have a high interest rate?" Miss Clara's smile faltered. She set the brush down, her hands trembling slightly. "No, eso es. The state doesn't charge children for clothes. My mother says the state is just a collection of other people's money," I told her, repeating a phrase I had heard Valerie say during one of her televised panels on corporate tax reform. "And since other people don't know me, they have no reason to give me things." She said charity is a transaction where the buyer purchases a good conscience. What is the state buying by giving me this dress? Miss Clara didn't have an answer. She just looked at me with those wet, heavy eyes that everyone seemed to have these days. The courthouse was larger than our mansion, but it felt colder. The floors were gray marble, polished so high I could see the reflection of my patent leather shoes that Officer Ramirez had bought for me out of her own pocket, though she tried to lie and say they were evidence. I knew they weren't evidence. Evidence didn't smell like new rubber and leather. I had already marked down $60 in my mental ledger under debt to Ramirez. We sat in a small room off the side of the main corridor. Through the frosted glass, I could see the silhouettes of people moving back and forth. Suddenly, the door opened, and a man in a very expensive gray suit walked in. It was my father's lawyer, Mr. Vance. I recognized him because he had come to the house once when one of the maids had tried to sue my mother for slipping on the marble stairs. My mother had won that case, and the maid had to pay for the court fees, which my father told me was a beautiful example of justice. "Sally," Mr. Vance said, ignoring Miss Clara, who immediately stood up to block him. "Sir, you cannot be in here," Miss Clara said, her voice rising. "I am simply offering a family greeting, Mr. Vance said, his voice smooth and sweet, like the honey my mother kept in her private pantry that I was never allowed to touch. He looked past her at me. "Sally, your mother and father miss you very much. They're very sad about this big misunderstanding." I looked at his gold watch. It looked like it cost at least $10,000, the same amount my mother had transferred to Preston's depend card for pocket money. "Did they pay the reentry fee?" I asked. Mr. Vance blinked. "What's that, dear?" "The $10,000, I said. My mother said if I came back, the fee was $10,000. Did they pay it to the police? Or do I still owe it to them?" Mr. Vance's smooth smile twitched. He opened his leather briefcase and pulled out a small, glossy photograph. He slid it across the table toward me. It was a picture of Preston. He was sitting on the lawn of the mansion, holding a small golden retriever puppy. He was laughing, his teeth bright and white, his clothes clean and perfect. "Your brother got a new puppy," Mr. Vance said softly. "But he's very lonely without his sister. If you tell the judge today that the ledger was just a game, that you liked playing accounting with your dad, you can come home. We can go buy another puppy today. Anyone you want. It won't cost you a thing." I looked at the picture of the puppy. It was very cute. I wondered how much its food cost. I wondered if the puppy had to pay for its water, too, or if the reentry fee applied to dogs. "Preston's card had $10,000 on it," I said. "Yes," Mr. Vance said eagerly. "Your parents are very generous. They want to give you a card just like that, Sally, with your name on it." "Why did he get $10,000 for doing nothing, and I had to pay 50 cents for juice?" I asked. Mr. Vance's face darkened slightly, the warmth vanishing from his eyes like grease disappearing down a drain. "Your parents believe in different developmental paths for different temperaments, Sally. Preston is the heir to the family brand. He needs to understand wealth management. They wanted to make sure you were strong, independent, resilient. So, I was the cheap one," I said. "No, Sally. The state is cheap," I continued, looking down at my scratchy blue dress. "But you're expensive. I think I prefer the state." Before Mr. Vance could answer, the door was flung open again, and Detective Harrison walked in. He didn't say a word to the lawyer. He simply took Mr. Vance by the elbow, his grip so tight the fabric of the expensive gray suit bunched up, and hoisted him out of the room. "If I see you near this child again, Vance," Harrison's voice echoed from the hallway, "I will personally find a reason to hold you in a cell until the trial is over. Get out." The courtroom was crowded, but I sat in a small wooden box near the judge. The judge was an older woman with gray hair tied in a neat bun. She wore a long black robe that looked like it was made of very heavy, expensive wool. I wondered if she had to pay for it herself, or if the state bought it for her. My mother and father sat at a long table to the left. My mother looked perfect. Her hair was styled in her signature smooth bob, and she wore a simple, elegant black suit that made her look like she was attending a board meeting rather than a child abuse hearing. She didn't look at me. She was looking at a tablet, her fingers tapping the screen occasionally until her lawyer gently reached over and pushed the screen down. My father looked less perfect. His collar was slightly wrinkled, and he kept adjusting his tie. When he looked at me, his brow furrowed, just like it did on the afternoon of my 10th birthday when I asked for the cake. It was the look of a man who had encountered an error in his spreadsheet and couldn't figure out which cell was broken. The prosecutor, a young man with a sharp voice, stood in the center of the room. He held up my waterlogged notebook, now preserved in a clear plastic sleeve. "Mrs. Croft," the prosecutor said, turning toward my mother, "I want to talk about the entry from March 14th of last year. 2 slices of plain bread, $1. 1 cup of tap water, 20 cents. Late fee for kitchen cleanup, $5. Can you explain this?" My mother stood up slowly. She smoothed the front of her skirt. "It is quite simple," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the large room. She sounded exactly like she did during her TED Talks on productivity. "We live in an era of extreme entitlement. Children are raised to believe that the world owes them a living. We wanted Sally to understand the fundamental laws of thermodynamics and economics, energy in, energy out. Nothing is produced without labor." "She was 9 years old, Mrs. Croft," the prosecutor said. "Age is irrelevant to the laws of scarcity," Valerie replied, her tone perfectly reasonable, almost condescending. "We provided her with an opportunity to earn currency through household tasks, mopping, polishing, sorting recyclables. If she chose not to work, she had to bear the cost of her consumption. It is a standard behavioral modification program." "And your son, Preston?" the prosecutor asked, raising an eyebrow. "On the same day, March 14th, your bank records show a transfer of $15,000 to his personal account. Did he mop the floors?" "Preston has a different role," Valerie said, her voice remaining cold and steady. "He is being prepared for executive leadership. An executive must understand how to allocate capital, not perform manual labor. Giving him access to capital is a necessary part of his training." Sally's training was focused on labor and survival. It was tailored to her specific cognitive profile. "Her cognitive profile," the prosecutor repeated. "You mean the fact that she was your biological child, while Preston was adopted from a family of prominent tech investors?" A murmur ran through the courtroom. My mother's eyes narrowed, a tiny flash of anger appearing in her pale eyes before she quickly masked it. "The lineage of our children is private," she said. "Let's talk about the survival aspect then," the prosecutor said. He turned to me. "Sally, can you tell the judge what happened when you didn't have enough money for dinner?" I looked at the judge. She was leaning forward, her chin resting on her hand, her eyes fixed on me. "I went to bed," I said. My voice sounded very small in the big room, so I tried to speak louder. "If I didn't have the dollar for the bread, I would lie down and try to sleep fast. Because if you're asleep, you don't feel the hunger as much. But sometimes my stomach would make a noise, and my dad said that noise was a disturbance of the peace in the household, so he would charge me 50 cents for the noise." Someone in the back of the courtroom gasped. My father stood up, his face red. "That was a joke." "It was a joke to make her quiet. Sit down, Mr. Croft," the judge said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was very cold. "We never forced her to go hungry," my mother added, her voice rising slightly for the first time. "The pantry was always unlocked. She could have taken food at any time. The fact that she chose to follow the ledger so literally is proof of her own stubbornness. She was trying to make us look bad." "The pantry had a digital lock, Mother," I said, looking directly at her for the first time. The courtroom went quiet. "You change the code every Monday," I continued. "And you told me the code cost $5 to learn. I didn't have $5 because the recycling center was closed during the winter, so I couldn't sell any cans. I asked Preston to tell me the code, but he said he would only tell me if I gave him my shoes. But my shoes cost $10 from the ledger, and if I didn't have them, I couldn't go outside to look for cans when the spring came. So I couldn't give him the shoes." My mother stared at me. For the first time, her elegant posture seemed to stiffen. Her lips pressed together into a thin, white line. "This is absurd," she muttered, turning to her lawyer. "She is fabricating details." "We have the digital logs from the pantry door, Mrs. Croft." Harrison's voice came from the back of the room. He wasn't on the stand, but he stood by the door, his arms crossed. "And we have the security footage from inside the kitchen. Would you like us to play the video from February 12th? The night Sally spent 3 hours trying to guess the code while your husband watched from the dining table, drinking a glass of scotch?" My father sank back into his chair. He looked very small now. His expensive suit seemed too big for him. The trial lasted for 2 more weeks, but I didn't have to go back to the courtroom after that first day. I stayed at the shelter. Officer Ramirez came to see me almost every evening. She would bring me small things, a coloring book, a box of crayons, a hair clip with a little plastic daisy on it. Every time she gave me something, I would look at it and try to calculate its value. "The daisy clip is probably $2, I told her one evening as we sat on the porch of the shelter. "And the crayons are $3. That's $5. I have written it down." Ramirez sat down beside me. She didn't look angry, just sad. She took the small notebook I had been using, the one where I had scratched the numbers with a spoon, and looked at the pages. "Sally," she said gently, "why do you keep doing this?" "Because if I don't, who will?" I asked. "If the ledger isn't balanced, then someone is losing money. And the person who loses money is always the one who gets punished." "In a real family," Ramirez said, her voice soft, "there is no ledger. When a mother gives her child a glass of juice, she doesn't do it because she wants 50 cents. She does it because she loves her child and wants her to be happy." "But why?" I insisted. "What does she get back?" "She gets to see her child grow up," Ramirez said. "She gets to see her smile. Love isn't a transaction, Sally. It's just something you give because you have it." I looked down in my hands. My mother had millions of dollars. She wrote big checks for the charity galas. She had so much money, but she didn't have 50 cents for my juice. Ramirez didn't answer. She just reached out and pulled me close. This time, I didn't pull away. I let her hold me, though my mind was still busy, trying to figure out how many hours of work I would have to do to pay her back for the hug. The verdict came on a rainy Tuesday. Valerie and Richard Croft were found guilty of multiple counts of felony child abuse, unlawful confinement, and neglect. Because of their wealth and the high-profile nature of the case, the judge did not give them a fine. "A financial penalty would be meaningless to people of your resources," the judge said during the sentencing, her voice echoing through the crowded room. I read her words later in the newspaper that Miss Clara left on the kitchen table. "You have treated your own daughter as an asset to be depreciated, a liability to be managed. You have shown a complete lack of basic human empathy." They were both sentenced to 12 years in a federal penitentiary. The Croft estate was seized, and a large portion of their wealth was placed into a trust fund for me, a fund that I could not touch until I was 21, and that would be managed by a state-appointed guardian. Preston was sent to live with his biological relatives in another state. I heard they were very wealthy too, but I didn't care. On the day I was supposed to leave the shelter to go to my new foster home, Officer Ramirez came to pick me up. She had a small car, a blue sedan that smelled like old coffee and French fries. It was much smaller than the armored SUVs my mother used to ride in, but it felt warmer. "Are you ready, Sally?" she asked, helping me put my small suitcase in the trunk. "Yes," I said. We drove out of the city, away from the tall glass buildings, away from the gated community where the lawns were manicured and the air conditioning cost 12 cents an hour. We drove until the buildings turned into trees, and the roads became narrower and quieter. Finally, we pulled up to a small, yellow house with a wide front porch. There were blue flowers growing along the walkway, and a tire swing hung from a large oak tree in the front yard. An older woman with gray hair and a bright red apron stood on the porch, waving at us. "That's Mrs. Gable," Ramirez said, turning off the engine. "She's very nice. She has a big garden, and she loves to bake." I got out of the car, carrying my suitcase. My heart was beating fast, a small, familiar flutter of panic rising in my throat. New house, new room, new ledger. I walked up the wooden steps. Mrs. Gable smiled down at me, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Welcome home, Sally," she said. "You must be hungry after the long drive. I made some strawberry shortcake." I stopped on the top step. I looked at the porch, then at the door, and then at Mrs. Gable's kind, lined face. "How much?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Mrs. Gable blinked, her smile turning into a soft, understanding look. She knelt down until she was eye level with me. She didn't look like she was about to cry, which I was glad for. She just looked steady. "It's free, Sally," she said. "The cake, the room, the garden, the tire swing, too. It's all free." I stood there for a long moment, the wind blowing the scent of damp earth and strawberries toward me. I reached into my pocket and felt the small, scratchy notebook I had kept. Slowly, I pulled it out. I looked at the indented marks I had made with the spoon, the list of debts, the calculations of my existence. I walked over to the edge of the porch, where a large green trash can sat by the side of the house. I opened the lid, dropped the notebook inside, and let the lid slam shut. "Can I have a big piece?" I asked, looking back at Mrs. Gable. "With lots of frosting?" "As big as you want, sweetheart," she said. I smiled. It was a small, rusty movement of my face, one I hadn't used in a very long time. But as I walked through the front door and into the warm, sweet-smelling kitchen, I knew I had plenty of time to practice.